I arrived home that night to a family dinner, a supposed celebration of my latest achievement. But as I walked into the dining room, I heard them before they saw me. Always so busy with her precious buildings, Lila's voice dripped with disdain. As if concrete and glass are more important than family. Now. My mother's saccharine tone made my skin crawl. Sophia's just different. She's always been a bit cold, hasn't she? All ambition, no heart. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still on the knob. The crystal award in my bag suddenly felt like lead. I mean, what's the point of all her success if she's alone? Daniel chimed in. No husband, no kids. Just a bunch of shiny trophies and an empty house. My father's silence was deafening. I should have been angry. I should have stormed in, confronted them, defended myself. Instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was as if I was looking at a flawed blueprint, finally seeing the structural weaknesses that had been there all along. Quietly, I closed the door and retreated to my home office. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by the models and sketches of my latest project, a sustainable urban community that could house thousands, I realized I had been building on unstable ground for years. It was time for a new design, a complete demolition and rebuild. I opened my laptop and began to plan. The next morning, I walked into the dining room as if nothing had happened. My family, bleary-eyed and hungover from their celebration of my success, or perhaps their relief at my absence, barely looked up as I entered. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady. "I hope you all enjoyed yourselves last night." My mother, Eleanor, peered at me over her coffee cup. "Oh, Sophia, there you are. We missed you at dinner. Another late night at the office?" I could hear the accusation in her voice, the implication that I had once again chosen work over family. I smiled, a practiced expression that never quite reached my eyes. "Actually, I came home early. I wanted to surprise you all." A flicker of unease crossed my mother's face. Had she realized I might have overheard their conversation? "Well," she recovered quickly, "you should have joined us. We were celebrating your award after all." I nodded, taking a seat at the table. "Yes, the Sustainable Design Innovation Award. It's a significant achievement for the firm." "Oh, honey," my father, Robert, finally spoke up. "You know we don't understand all that architectural jargon. As long as you're happy, that's what matters." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. When had he become so small, so inconsequential? He had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over when mother's sharp edges cut too deep. But now I saw him for what he truly was. An enabler. A man who had abdicated his responsibilities and left me to shoulder the burden. "I am happy, Dad," I said softly. "My work brings me joy. It gives me purpose." Lila snorted, not even trying to hide her disdain. "Purpose? Come on, Sophia. They're just buildings. It's not like you're saving lives or anything." I turned to her, my gaze level. "You're right, Lila. I'm not saving lives. I'm creating spaces where lives can thrive. I'm designing communities that are sustainable, accessible, and beautiful. I'm leaving a legacy that will outlast all of us." The table fell silent. I had never defended my work so openly before, never pushed back against their dismissals. Daniel, sensing the tension, tried to change the subject. "Speaking of legacies, Soph, I've been meaning to talk to you about the trust fund. I've got this amazing investment opportunity." "No." I cut him off, my voice firm. "We're not discussing the trust fund right now, Daniel. In fact, I think it's time we all had a serious conversation about our financial arrangements." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. I could almost see the walls going up, the defenses being mounted. They knew on some level that everything was about to change. As I looked around the table at their wary faces, I realized that these people, my family, were like the weight-bearing walls in a poorly designed building. They had been holding me up, yes, but also holding me back. And now, it was time to see if I could stand on my own. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. The Sustainable City project was entering a critical phase, and I used it as both a distraction and an inspiration. As I redesigned living spaces to promote community and well-being, I couldn't help but see parallels to my own life. Every evening, I would come home late, long after my family had finished dinner. I'd hear them whispering, speculating about my sudden change in behavior. But for once, I didn't rush to smooth things over or explain myself. Instead, I retreated to my home office and continued my secret project, the complete restructuring of my life. I started with the financials. Years ago, I had set up a trust fund for my family, thinking it would provide security and peace of mind. Instead, it had become a crutch, enabling their dependence and entitlement. With the help of my financial advisor, I began the process of transferring my assets into a new separate account. Next came the legal preparations. I drafted documents to protect myself from potential backlash, including restraining orders if necessary. It felt extreme, but as I thought back to Daniel's past outbursts and my mother's manipulative tactics, I knew it was a necessary precaution. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the principles of sustainable design that had guided my career. In architecture, we strive to create structures that are not just beautiful, but resilient and adaptable. Shouldn't the same principles apply to our lives? One night, as I was reviewing the plans for a community garden in my sustainable city project, I had an epiphany. I had been so focused on creating nurturing spaces for others that I had neglected to do the same for myself. My life, like a poorly planned urban sprawl, had become unsustainable. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to sketch. Not a building this time, but a new life plan. I drew concentric circles, representing the different aspects of my life, career, personal growth, relationships. In the center, I wrote a single word: self. For so long, I had put myself at the periphery, always orbiting around my family's needs. Now it was time to recenter, to build a life that was sustainable not just for others, but for me. As I worked on my plan late into the night, I could hear my family moving about the house. Their voices, once so central to my world, now seemed distant like echoes from another time. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a growing sense of excitement. I was an architect after all. And now, I was about to embark on my most important project yet, redesigning my own life from the ground up. The day of reckoning came sooner than I had anticipated. It was a Sunday, and for once, I hadn't made excuses to work. Instead, I joined my family for brunch, an event that had once been a weekly tradition, but had fallen by the wayside as my career took off. As we sat around the table, the tension was palpable. My mother, Eleanor, kept shooting me worried glances, while Daniel fidgeted nervously with his napkin. Only Lila seemed oblivious, chattering away about her latest social media drama. So, Sophia, my father finally broke the silence. It's good to have you here. We've missed you at these family gatherings. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for. I've missed them too, I said, my voice calm. Which is why I think it's time we had an honest conversation about our family dynamics. The room fell silent. Even Lila stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. What do you mean, dear? My mother asked, her voice sickly sweet. We're a perfectly happy family. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I saw not my mother, but a woman who had spent her life manipulating others to fill the void within herself. No, Mom, we're not, I said firmly. We haven't been a happy family for a long time. And I finally realized that I've been enabling our dysfunction. Daniel leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Come on, sophomore. What are you talking about? We've always supported you. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. Supported me? By mocking my career? By treating my success as something to be ashamed of? By constantly demanding more while giving nothing in return? Now, Sophia, my father interjected, his tone placating. I'm sure that's not what they meant. Stop. I cut him off. Just stop, Dad. Your silence, your refusal to stand up for me or for yourself, it's just as damaging as their words. I took another deep breath, steeling myself for what came next. I'm making changes, big changes, and I need you all to listen carefully. Over the next hour, I laid out my plan. I explained that I was cutting off their access to the trust fund, that I would no longer be available to solve their problems or fund their lifestyles. I told them about the legal protections I had put in place, the new boundaries I was setting. The reactions were exactly as I had anticipated. My mother oscillated between tears and rage, accusing me of abandoning the family. Daniel shouted and threatened, his face red with anger. Lila stormed out, slamming doors and declaring that I had always been a selfish bitch. Through it all, I remained calm. I had prepared for this, had run through every scenario in my mind. Their words, once so powerful, now bounced off me like rain off a well-designed roof. As the chaos swirled around me, I caught my father's eye. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of understanding, maybe even pride. But then he looked away, retreating into his usual passivity. When the shouting finally died down, I stood up. "I love you all," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. "But I can't keep living like this. I hope that one day you'll understand." With that, I walked out of the dining room and out of the house. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years. The demolition was complete. Now it was time to start rebuilding. The weeks following my Declaration of Independence were challenging, to say the least. My family, predictably, didn't take my decision lying down. The barrage of angry calls, guilt-tripping texts, and even a few unannounced visits to my office tested my resolve. But I held firm. Each time I was tempted to give in, to fall back into old patterns, I reminded myself of the blueprint I had created for my new life. I had designed it carefully, with intention and purpose. Like any good architect, I knew that a strong foundation was crucial for a lasting structure. At work, I threw myself into the Sustainable City project with renewed passion. As I collaborated with my team, fine-tuning designs and solving complex urban planning challenges, I found myself applying the same principles to my personal life. One afternoon, as I was reviewing plans for a community center, my assistant poked her head into my office. "Sophia, your sister Lila is here. She's demanding to see you." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Send her in, please." Lila burst into my office, her face a storm of emotions. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" I gestured for her to sit, maintaining my composure. "Lila, I understand you're upset, but my decision stands. You've always been so selfish," she spat. "Always putting your precious career first. And now you're abandoning us." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Behind the anger, I saw fear and insecurity. For the first time, I wondered if her constant belittling of my achievements had been a mask for her own feelings of inadequacy. "Lila," I said softly, "I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you the opportunity to stand on your own feet, to find your own path just like I did." She scoffed, but I pressed on. "Think about it. When was the last time you pursued something you were passionate about? When did you last challenge yourself to grow?" Lila fell silent, her anger seeming to deflate. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the sister I used to know, before our family dynamics became so toxic. I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice small. I nodded, feeling a surge of empathy. "That's what I want for you, Lila. For all of you. The chance to discover who you are outside of our family's dysfunction." As Lila left my office that day, I didn't know if I had gotten through to her, but I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this painful process could lead to growth for all of us. That evening, as I worked late into the night, I found myself sketching a new design. Not for a building, but for a bridge. A bridge that could, someday, reconnect our fractured family on healthier terms. I pinned the sketch to my wall, a reminder that while I was laying the foundation for my new life, I was also creating the possibility for a better future for all of us. As weeks turned into months, I settled into my new reality. The initial storm of family drama had subsided into a tense silence. No more angry calls or unannounced visits. Just a void where my family used to be. At first, the silence was deafening. I found myself reaching for my phone, tempted to check in, to make sure everyone was okay. But each time, I stopped myself. This was part of the process, I reminded myself. Like renovating an old building, sometimes you have to strip everything back to the bare bones before you can rebuild. I channeled my energy into my work and my personal growth. I started taking art classes in the evenings, rediscovering a passion I had abandoned years ago. On weekends, I volunteered at a local community center, helping to teach basic design principles to underprivileged youth. It was during one of these volunteer sessions that I had an unexpected encounter. I was helping a teenage girl sketch out ideas for a community garden when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Sophia. I turned to find my Aunt Maria standing there, her eyes wide with surprise. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she had a falling out with my mother and was effectively excommunicated from the family. Aunt Maria, I said, rising to greet her. What are you doing here? She smiled, gesturing to a group of elderly residents working on a mural. I volunteer here too. Art therapy for seniors. We stepped outside to talk, and as we walked through the community center's garden, Aunt Maria told me she had heard about my rebellion through the family grapevine. I'm proud of you, Sophia, she said, squeezing my hand. It takes courage to break free from toxic patterns. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. It's been hard, I admitted. I keep wondering if I did the right thing. Aunt Maria stopped, turning to face me. Let me tell you something, dear. Years ago, when I walked away from your mother's manipulations, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But it was also the most important. It allowed me to become the person I was meant to be. As we talked, I realized that Aunt Maria had been through exactly what I was experiencing now. She had faced the same guilt, the same doubts, the same painful growth. And she had emerged stronger, happier, more fulfilled. That conversation was a turning point for me. It helped me see that what I was doing wasn't just about setting boundaries or asserting my independence. It was about breaking a generational cycle of dysfunction. As I drove home that evening, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just renovating my life. I was laying the groundwork for a healthier future. Not just for me, but for my entire family, whether they realized it yet or not. I thought about the sustainable city project I was working on, how every decision we made would impact generations to come. In a way, I was doing the same thing with my personal life, creating a sustainable model for happiness and fulfillment. That night, I added a new element to my life blueprint: connection. Not the codependent connections of my past, but healthy, nurturing relationships like the one I was rebuilding with Aunt Maria. As I fell asleep, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The renovation was far from complete, but for the first time, I could clearly see the beautiful structure emerging from the rubble of my old life. Just as I was beginning to feel settled in my new life, an unexpected tremor shook the foundations I had so carefully laid. It came in the form of a frantic call from Lila. Sophia, you need to come home. It's Dad. He's had a heart attack. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. In an instant, all my carefully constructed boundaries and resolutions crumbled. I found myself racing to the hospital, my heart pounding with fear and guilt. Had the stress of our family upheaval contributed to this? As I burst into the hospital waiting room, I was confronted with the sight of my family, a tableau I had deliberately avoided for months. My mother, for once, looked small and vulnerable. Daniel paced restlessly, while Lila sat with her head in her hands. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Oh, Sophia," she said, her voice breaking. "You came." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Despite everything, these were still my people, and they were hurting. The next few days were a blur of hospital corridors, hushed conversations with doctors, and tense silences in the waiting room. My father pulled through, but the experience left us all shaken. One evening, as I was sitting by my father's bedside while he slept, my mother joined me. For a long time, we sat in silence, the beeping of the heart monitor the only sound. Finally she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot, Sophia. About what you said. About our family." I turned to look at her, really look at her, perhaps for the first time in years. The lines on her face seemed deeper, her eyes tired but clear. "I haven't been fair to you," she continued. "None of us have. We've taken you for granted, expected you to carry us all. And when you finally stood up for yourself, we lashed out." I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "Mom," she reached out, taking my hand in hers. "I'm not saying I understand everything. I'm not saying it will be easy. But I want to try. To do better. To be better." In that moment, I saw a glimmer of the mother I had always longed for. Not perfect, not even close, but willing to grow, to change. As my father recovered, and we all adjusted to this new reality, I realized that the tremor that had shaken my world hadn't destroyed the foundation I had built. Instead, it had revealed its strength. I had stood firm in my boundaries while still being there for my family in a crisis. I had shown compassion without falling back into old unhealthy patterns. And something else had shifted too. My family, faced with the fragility of life, seemed to be reevaluating their own choices and behaviors. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still tense moments, misunderstandings, old habits that died hard. But there was also a new willingness to communicate, to listen, to try. As an architect, I knew that even the most carefully designed structures need to be flexible enough to withstand unexpected forces. The same, I was learning, was true of families and relationships. The blueprint of my new life hadn't been destroyed by this crisis. Instead, it had been tested, refined, and ultimately strengthened. And as I looked at my family, battered and bruised, but still standing, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could all embark on this renovation process together. A year had passed since that fateful night, when I overheard my family's true feelings. A year of challenges, growth, and unexpected turns. As I stood on the podium, preparing to give a speech at the opening ceremony of our Sustainable City project, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The city sprawled before me, a testament to sustainable design and community-focused living. Solar panels glinted on rooftops, green spaces flourished between buildings, and people moved through the streets with a sense of purpose and belonging. It was everything we had envisioned and more. As I began my speech, I saw familiar faces in the crowd. My team, of course, beaming with pride at what we had accomplished. But there in the third row was my family. My father, looking healthier than he had in years, sat with his arm around my mother. Lila and Daniel flanked them, their expressions a mix of pride and something that looked like respect. This city, I said into the microphone, is more than just buildings and roads. It's a vision of what's possible when we prioritize sustainability, community, and personal growth. As I spoke, I found myself drawing parallels between the city's development and my own journey over the past year. We faced challenges, I continued. There were times when it seemed easier to fall back on old unsustainable practices. But we persevered, always keeping our end goal in mind. And in doing so, we've created something truly transformative. I caught my mother's eye, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but we were both trying. Family therapy, individual counseling, and a lot of honest conversations had helped us start to rebuild on healthier foundations. This city is designed to evolve, I said, nearing the end of my speech, to adapt to the changing needs of its residents while staying true to its core principles. It's a living, breathing entity that will grow and change over time, just like us. As applause filled the air, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a new beginning. The sustainable city was launched, ready to house thousands and serve as a model for future developments. And I too felt ready for whatever came next. After the ceremony, I joined my family for dinner. As we sat around the table, sharing a meal and genuine conversation, I marveled at how far we'd come. We weren't perfect, far from it. But we were trying, learning, growing together. Daniel raised his glass in a toast. To Sophia, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, for showing us a better way to live, both in this amazing city and in our family. As we clinked glasses, I felt a warmth spread through me. This, I realized, was the true grand unveiling, not just of a city, but of a new way of being, a way that prioritized personal growth, honest communication, and sustainable relationships. Later that night, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city lights, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The painful demolition, the careful rebuilding, the unexpected tremors that had tested my new foundation. I had redesigned my life, just as I had helped design this city. And like the city, my life was now built on principles of sustainability, resilience, and growth. It wasn't perfect, and there would always be challenges to face. But I was ready for them. As an architect, I had always known the power of good design. Now, I understood that the same principles could be applied to life itself. With the right blueprint, anything was possible. I smiled, breathing in the night air. The future stretched out before me, full of possibility, and I couldn't wait to see what I would build next.